Hello and welcome finally to another episode of All About Down Bass. Yes, I know it's been a while. So today's bass is going to be my Shallow Grave bass. Now this is one that I actually designed last year, and I had every intention of doing a video for this bass kind of last September, October time, but then life got in the way and everything went a bit bonkers. So I decided to make that my first bass that I did when I came back to doing these videos. Now, I quite like this bass. I struggle with it a little bit because it's very messy. And I usually like my basses to be quite nicely designed and kind of neat and tidy. Whereas I wanted this one to really have that look and feel of a disrupted kind of forest floor. So everything's kind of scattered a bit randomly. So from a distance, it looks like a bit of a messy bass. But then it's when you get closer to it that you actually kind of see the bits of skeleton sticking out and you kind of realise what it's meant to be. So I quite like it, and I hope you do too. So let's hit the table and I will see you in a little bit. So I'm using one of my wooden bases for this, and the first thing you're going to want to get is some skeleton sprue bits. So this has come from a sprue for a skeleton army, and I've just cut a few bits and pieces off. Then you're going to want to take some white pumice and just start building up a layer of this on the base. This is going to become our kind of ground texture, but it's also going to serve as our adhesive for the skeleton parts, because we're going to push those down into this, which is going to give the illusion of them being half buried, but the pumice is also going to be what sticks them to the base and keeps them in place. So once you've got a nice thick layer of the pumice, you just want to start arranging the skeleton bits. So I've just started with the rib cage there, just off centre, and then I'm going to go on to the skull. And obviously you don't need to be neat with this, because animals will have come by and disrupted the area and things like that. So I'm just putting on the pelvis and the leg, and it was a little bit long, so I just cut a little bit off. And then for his right leg, I'm just going to add a foot. So the rest of his leg is either missing or buried, and there's just going to be a foot poking out. And I'm just going to give him one arm as well, but that arm's going to be kind of reaching out of the ground. Then I'm just going to touch up the pumice, just again to make sure it's got that really uneven texture to it, and just to cover up a few bits of the bones a little bit more as well. Once that dried, I used Army Painter Bone Primer to give it a nice bone colour for the skeleton. And now what I'm doing is I'm just painting over the dirt section with some Citadel Steel Legion Drab. And the only reason for doing this layer of painting is just so that once we've put our dirt texture on top, we're making sure that none of that bone colour kind of shines through. It just helps to kind of keep the colour of the earth consistent, and we don't get any little bits that don't look right. Now, you don't have to be massively careful with this. If you do get a bit on the skeleton, it doesn't matter. Next, what we're going to do is give it a good wash all over with some Agrax Earthshade. And I'm being really heavy with this because I want the skeleton to look really weathered and have all of that Agrax sinking down into the recesses in between the bones. And I'm just covering all of the dirt section with this as well. And then you're just going to leave that to dry for a little bit. And then again, this is an extra touch that I just do in case any of it shows through. I just put a little bit of dry brushing with some Zandri dust onto the earth section. I was a little bit too heavy-handed there and used a bit much, but just give it a nice quick dry brush. And again, it doesn't matter if you get any of this onto the skeleton parts. So now we're going to start building up the earth and ground effects around it. So I've just got a couple of cheap dead grass tufts, and I'm just going to put a couple of those on just to obscure a couple of the areas of bone, like next to the skeleton and next to the pelvis. Next, what we're going to need is some really cheap super glue. Don't use the expensive stuff. And what I've got in my little tub is some sifted coconut fibre. You can buy that really cheap on eBay. Now, I'm being really generous with the super glue and equally really generous with the coconut fibre as well. What you'll see is when you start dropping the coconut fibre into the super glue, it doesn't really look that great because it kind of, the super glue just kind of sucks it in and it kind of gives it quite a wet look, which is good for some things, but not for this particular one. So just make sure you sprinkle loads and loads of the coconut fibre on, because you will get a nice top layer that looks nice and dry, unlike the kind of dirt effect we're going for. And I'm just putting this in between all the little gaps, making sure I don't miss anywhere. And again, if you get some super glue on the skeleton itself, it doesn't matter, because obviously it's a buried skeleton, it's going to have some dirt on it. So I left that to dry for about an hour, and then I did my Taylor Swift and shake it off and just get rid of any excess. And now we're going to add a few extra touches. So the first thing I've got is some kind, it's like a leafy vine thing that I found online. I think it's a company called Mini Nature, and I think it's apple vine or something. So I've just cut a couple of tiny pieces of this off, and then I'm going back in with my super glue and I'm just going to place that on top of the skeleton randomly. And it just gives that illusion again of a forest floor that's got leaves and branches scattered on it. And once you're happy with that, we're going to move on to some natural leaf litter from Green Stuff World. Now this stuff is great for this size of base, because it really does look like real autumn leaves. So I'm just going to put a few blobs of super glue on there and then sprinkle on those leaves. And all that's left to do now is paint the rim. Now I've used Corvus Black for this, but equally you could go back to using the Steel Legion Drab or whatever colour you find works for you aesthetically when you're painting the rims of your bases. And once that's dry, you're done. And here's the finished product. So as you can see, it's very messy, like I said at the beginning, but it gives that nice effect because you can just see that skull and the little bit of skeleton poking through. So there you go. That is my shallow grave base. Feel free to let me know what you think down in the comments, and if you did enjoy this video, please consider supporting the channel by clicking the like button and maybe even clicking the subscribe button. And that way you'll get notified when I release new content. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and the links are down in the description. And I will be back soon with another video. So until then, happy hobbying.